Well, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about, and I have a pretty unique one for you today. Now, over the years, I've talked about a number of films that combine genres, but I think this one might take the cake for combining the most genres. I'm talking about Brian G. Hutton's World War II comedy heist film, Kelly's Heroes. Kelly's Heroes follows Private Kelly, a recently demoted lieutenant who, after interrogating a German officer, learns of a cache of gold bars being stored in the French village. Disillusioned with the war and finding their commanding officer otherwise occupied, Kelly and his platoon, along with a whole cast of unusual characters, decide to go after the gold and set themselves up for life. So as you can see, this is not your usual World War II film. Generally speaking, war movies tend to fall into two basic camps, either the more awesome action movie end that, don't get me wrong, can be very fun to watch, but not always that realistic. Or you have the anti-war film, which is often much more realistic, but also usually very sad and not necessarily one you'd want to always pop on for a movie night. But I find Kelly's Heroes kind of falls in this third box of being very fun and exciting, but also criticizing war at the same time. Maybe not as much as your typical anti-war film, but it's certainly not pro-war either. And what's really strange is that this was not the only film to fall into that so-called third box when it came out. You see, that same year, 1970, also saw the release of Mike Nichols' epic Catch-22 and Robert Altman's famously subversive MASH. All three of them satirical comedies about previous wars, Catch-22 being World War II and MASH being the Korean War, while all three were actually commenting on current-day fighting in Vietnam. And though MASH was the only one of the three to make much of a profit, I just find it so interesting that the three biggest wartime satires of Vietnam all came out in the very same year. And a lot of this comes from the fact that 1970 was right in the middle of the Vietnam War, and was a few years after some of the major events in Vietnam like the My Lai Massacre and the Tet Offensive, which had really turned a lot of people away from supporting the war. But it was no doubt still a pretty hot button issue, and so it seems like maybe the perfect way to talk about the current war was through exploring the ones in the past. And none of these films are a complete comedy romp the whole way through. Each one has moments which cut the humorous absurdities with the sad realities of warfare. But out of the three, though Catch-22 has a number of great moments and a fantastic cast and director, and MASH has along with that the most critical praise and legacy, Kelly's Heroes has always been my favorite of the three, and what I personally find to be the funniest. It's just got such a great cast, which I'll get into in a moment, great writing, production, directing, and a very catchy theme song. The soundtrack was actually done by the great Lalo Schifrin, who I always think of when it comes to music of the 60s and 70s. I've already talked about him a bit in the video I made on Bullet back in the day, but I'd say for most people, if you think you've never heard of him, look no further than the Mission Impossible theme song. But here he creates some great tunes and even does a bit in the style of Ennio Morricone, referencing Clint Eastwood's recent bunch of spaghetti westerns. But the main track, Burning Bridges, sung by the Mike Curb congregation, contrasted with the gritty World War II combat, with bombs exploding nearby and heavy rain pouring down, makes for an incredible opener and really sets the tone for this offbeat war film. And for most accounts, the production used real wartime military vehicles and weapons was fairly period accurate, so it makes it all the more funny when it gets countered with these very 60s additions like tank driving hippies who blast Hank Williams Jr. music through their loudspeakers. And the script was written by Troy Kennedy Martin, who most famously penned The Italian Job, probably one of the most iconic heist movies ever. And the idea for this film actually came from a true story, that being the robbery of the German National Gold Reserves in Bavaria back in 1945. The story was even listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the greatest robbery on record, but Given the Army's involvement, the actual details behind the robbery were heavily covered up and unavailable to him when he started writing the script, and so he decided to put his own spin on the idea. And the film's director, Brian G. Hutton, was also an actor in small parts, and can be seen in a number of major films, including Gunfight at the OK Corral and the Elvis classic King Creole. And though he had a pretty solid directing career, directing big names like Elizabeth Taylor in Night Watch and Frank Sinatra in one of his best performances in a little-known film called The First Deadly Sin, he's not generally very well known today, but back in the late 60s he was a big up-and-comer, given his success with one of Eastwood's previous films, an adaptation of Alistair MacLean's Where Eagles Dare. He was soon selected to direct Kelly's Heroes and does a wonderful job balancing tone and makes this nearly 2.5-hour comedy seem to fly by. In fact, I remember being really surprised when I realized just how long the film was. And apparently there were a number of scenes that were cut from the film at MGM's request, making it at one time close to 3 hours, so I can understand why they would want to trim it down some, though according to Clint Eastwood, a decent amount of what they cut was not actually for time and was instead because of the anti-war message. And since this was the pre-Dirty Harry days, Eastwood still didn't have quite enough power to stop the studio from making these cuts. And there was even somewhat of a remake of this film done in the late 90s called Three Kings. Though scaled down and set during the Persian Gulf War, David O. Russell's film does certainly follow a similar plot of soldiers trying to steal gold across the backdrop of a war, though that is pretty much where the similarities end. And now for this film's fantastic cast. And I know I say in a lot of these videos that everyone in the film is great, even if I don't get a chance to mention every single person, but this film feels almost like the epitome of great casting. I don't think there's a boring person in the whole movie. Everyone is just so different and original, it's really no wonder that this film doesn't feel its runtime. I mean, Clint Eastwood kind of plays it straight as, Clint Eastwood, and Telly Savalas is kind of this classic cynical Sergeant Big Joe, but then you have all of these wild cards like Oddball, played by the great Donald Sutherland, who's this hippie tank commander along with this pessimistic tank mechanic Moriarty, played by Gavin MacLeod, and the two have this hilarious banter as Oddball thinks Moriarty is giving off too many negative waves.
There you go, more negative waves. Have a little faith, baby. Have a little faith.
And then you have Don Rickles, of all people, as the supply sergeant crap gang, and he of course just roasts everyone the entire time, particularly Oddball. And you can even find some old press interviews on YouTube that were recorded on set in Yugoslavia where the film was shot, and Rickles is clearly very happy to take the spotlight and gives a hilarious routine. But the one who really steals the show whenever he comes on screen has to be Carrol O'Connor as the Major General Colt, who is constantly flustered and is just hilarious to watch.
Attack, attack, attack! That's the kind of fighting spirit that I was talking about. Listen to that guy. If he was a major, he's a colonel now.
And then since you of course have the rest of the platoon filled out with classic character actors like Harry Dean Stanton and Stuart Margolin, you can probably see what I mean when I say this film has an incredibly stacked cast of actors, though you may not know all of their names. And as you might have noticed, nobody is referred to by their full name. Either they are given a nickname or just referred to by their last name. And as goofy as a name like Oddball is, my favorite still has to be the Artillery Sergeant Mulligan, which might actually be his real name, they never specify, but given his tendency to bomb the wrong spots, the name certainly fits.
That crazy Mulligan's dropping them all over the place.
And a fun fact, he was played by Telly Savalas' younger brother, George Savalas. And if these nuns they pass by look a bit peculiar, that is because they were apparently just production assistants in costume. One of them being none other than a young John Landis, who got his start working on this film. Landis has even said that he got the idea for his iconic werewolf film, An American Werewolf in London, while in Yugoslavia working on Kelly's Heroes.
Very good, Fisher. You win a cookie.
So if you like to watch Kelly's Heroes, you can rent or buy it from all the usual places online, and if you want to get it physically, on DVD it's pretty easy to pick up. You can find it various different ways, whether in a war movie 4-pack or just in a single case like this. But on Blu-ray, it's a little tougher to find by itself. The only way I've been able to pick it up is in this kind of action double feature with Where Eagles Dare, which is fine for most people, and I guess I get it. It's the same director, same lead actor, and basically same genre. Where Eagles Dare is not nearly as much of a comedy as Kelly's Heroes, but I can see why they're bundled together. But I would hope someday Kelly's Heroes gets the singular treatment and maybe some bonus features. A commentary track would be nice. But seeing that some of the other films from its day, like Catch-22, still doesn't have a Blu-ray at all, I guess we kind of just have to take what we can get for now. But hopefully someday this can get an upgrade. So for my comment question, I am wondering, what is your favorite cast in a film? Even though at first glance you might not recognize everyone, you will definitely remember them all by the end of the film. And though there are tons of classic ensemble films with stars galore like Stanley Kramer's It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, a great ensemble cast doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in it has to be famous, but rather that they all just work together and add to the film in their own unique way. So write down some of your favorites in the comment section down below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. Remember to keep watching movies, and I will see you again soon.